They took her badge, her dignity, and her mother's house. They did it on a Tuesday morning in February, in front of neighbors who looked away, and a sheriff's deputy who wouldn't meet her eyes. They thought they had chosen the right target. They thought no one was watching. What they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that the woman, standing barefoot on the frozen porch of that foreclosed house in Clover Ridge, Georgia, holding a cardboard box of her mother's photographs, was Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Elaine Vickers. Judge Advocate, General's Corps, 16 years of service, 2 tours in Kuwait, 1 in Germany, and a law degree from Howard University that she'd earned before she ever put on a uniform. They didn't know who she was, and that was the last mistake they would ever make on the job. Eunice Vickers had lived in the house on Sycamore Bluff Road for 31 years. She and her late husband, Arthur, had bought it in 1993, when the neighborhood was still modest, still quiet, still the kind of place where people left their screen doors unlocked and brought each other pie when someone passed. Arthur had laid the tile in the kitchen himself. Eunice had planted the magnolia tree in the front yard, the one that had grown so tall its branches now scraped the second-floor window of the bedroom, where both her daughters had been born, or rather, brought home from the hospital too, which amounted to the same thing in Eunice's accounting. Arthur died in 2019. A stroke, quick and unkind, the way strokes always are. He died on a Thursday. By Friday, Eunice was alone in a house that suddenly had too many rooms and not enough sound. Her younger daughter, Tamara, lived 40 minutes away in Savannah with her husband and 3 kids. She called every Sunday. She visited for holidays, and sometimes for no reason at all, which Eunice appreciated more than she ever said out loud. Her older daughter, Naomi, was stationed in Stuttgart, Germany, when Arthur died. She flew home on emergency leave, stayed 3 weeks, helped sort through Arthur's affairs, held her mother while she cried in the kitchen over a casserole neither of them ate, and then flew back, because the Army doesn't pause for grief, not even the good kind. What happened next happened, the way financial disasters always happen to people who never saw them coming, gradually, and then all at once. Eunice had taken out a home equity line of credit in 2021. Just a small one, her financial advisor had told her, cheerful and certain in the way people with no skin in the game always are. Just to cover some of the estate taxes, some of the carrying costs. The house is an asset, Mrs. Vickers. You're sitting on equity. It's money just waiting to be used. The financial advisor's name was Terence Aldecoa. He worked for a wealth management firm called Meridian Financial Partners, which had an office in a glass building in downtown Augusta with a lobby that smelled like leather and fresh flowers. Terence was 41, had good hair, wore a Rolex on his left wrist, and had never, in his professional life, worked with a client who didn't already have at least $250,000 in liquid assets. Eunice Vickers had the house. She had Arthur's pension. She had a modest savings account. She was not the kind of client Meridian typically took on, and she had come to them through a referral from her church, which should have been the first warning sign, and wasn't, because Eunice trusted her church, and her church trusted the referral. And the referral came from someone whose cousin's friend had done very well through Meridian. And so the chain of trust stretched just long enough to snap. The loan terms were predatory. Eunice didn't know that. The rate was adjustable. Eunice didn't fully understand that. When the rate adjusted in 2022, and then again in 2023, the monthly payments climbed in increments so small and steady that Eunice kept believing she was managing, right up until the month she wasn't. She called Tamara. Tamara sent money. It helped for 2 months. She called Naomi. Naomi, who was preparing for a legal proceeding in Stuttgart that couldn't be transferred, sent money too, and then called Meridian Financial Partners directly, identified herself by name and rank, and asked to speak with someone about the terms of her mother's loan. She was transferred to a junior associate named Chad Bellwether, 27 years old, 3 years out of a mid-tier business school, who listened to Naomi explain the situation with the practiced patience of someone who had been trained to sound sympathetic while saying nothing helpful. He told her the terms were standard. He told her the rate adjustment was disclosed in the original documents. He told her Meridian had attempted to contact Mrs. Vickers multiple times before the default was initiated. "I'd like to see the communication records," Naomi said. "Those are internal documents," Bellwether replied. "We're not required to share those." "I'm aware of what you're required to share," Naomi said. I'm asking as a courtesy, before this becomes something other than a courtesy conversation. Bellwether laughed. Not unkindly, but in the way someone laughs when they think they're talking to a person with no real leverage. Ma'am, I understand this is stressful for your family, but the foreclosure process has already been initiated. At this point, there's really nothing. Thank you for your time, Naomi said, and hung up. That was November. By February, the house had been sold at a county tax auction to a company called Blue Ridge Holdings LLC, which had purchased 14 properties in the same county over the previous 18 months, all in predominantly black neighborhoods, all from elderly homeowners who had taken out equity lines through referrals that traced back, with enough patience and the right FOIA requests, to a network of financial advisors who all shared the same quiet arrangement with the same auction house and the same set of county officials who never seemed to notice the pattern. The deputy's name was Harold Pruitt. He was 53, beefy, with a handlebar mustache that he'd had since the 90s and a disposition that had calcified somewhere around 2004. He arrived at Eunice Vickers' door on a Tuesday morning in February with an eviction order and a locksmith and 2 men from a moving company who wore no expression at all. Eunice had known they were coming. Naomi had told her 2 nights before on a phone call that lasted 3 hours. She'd told her not to fight it, not physically, not that day. She had told her to let them do what they were going to do and to take photographs of everything and to call her the moment it was over. You're sure? Eunice had asked. I'm sure, Naomi had said. Trust me. Eunice trusted her so. When Harold Pruitt knocked on the door of 441 Sycamore Bluff Road at 9:14 in the morning, Eunice opened it. She was dressed, which Pruitt clearly hadn't expected. She was wearing her church clothes, a navy blue dress, her good shoes, pearl earrings that Arthur had given her on their 25th anniversary. She was holding a box of photographs. Mrs. Vickers, Pruitt said, reading from a clipboard. I have an eviction order for. I know what you have, Eunice said. Her voice was steady. I raised 2 daughters in this house. I would appreciate if your men would be careful with the magnolia tree in the front yard. My husband planted it. Pruitt blinked. He hadn't expected that either. He was used to tears, to arguments, to doors that didn't open. He didn't know what to do with dignity. Ma'am, he said after a moment. We'll be careful. Eunice nodded. She walked down the porch steps and stood on the front lawn in the February cold, holding her box of photographs, while the men from the moving company carried what little she had elected to take out of the house and loaded it into Tamara's van, which was parked at the curb. Naomi wasn't there. She was standing in an airport terminal in Frankfurt, boarding a flight to Atlanta with a carry-on bag and a laptop and a folder of documents that she'd spent the past 60 days assembling with the same systematic attention she brought to every JAG proceeding she'd ever handled. She had not slept more than 4 hours in the past 3 nights. She had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. She had the look in her eyes that people who have been soldiers long enough get when they have decided that a situation is going to be resolved and have set about resolving it. She arrived in Clover Ridge at 6:47 in the evening. Tamara picked her up from the Savannah airport and drove her straight to Eunice's house, except that it was no longer Eunice's house, and they had to park outside on the street and look at the dark windows and the sold notice posted on the door and the magnolia tree in the yard, which was, in fact, unharmed. Eunice was staying with Tamara. She was fine. She was eating. She was watching her stories in the evenings and going to church on Sunday mornings and performing, for the benefit of everyone around her, a version of okay that didn't fool either of her daughters for a single second. How long? Tamara asked on the drive from the airport. Soon, Naomi said. That's not a timeline. No, Naomi agreed. It's not. She didn't say more because she was on the phone. The first call was to Special Agent Delray Okonkwo, FBI, Financial Crimes Unit, Atlanta Field Office, with whom she had worked on a procurement fraud case in 2021. Okonkwo answered on the second ring. Vickers, he said. Delray, she said. I need 30 minutes. She got 45. By the end of it, Okonkwo had a copy of the file she'd been building, and he was quiet in the way people go quiet when they stop seeing a personal problem and start seeing a federal case. How many properties? He asked. 14 confirmed, Naomi said. Possibly 20, all within a 30-mile radius, all initiated through the same network of referrals, all sold through the same auction mechanism to Blue Ridge Holdings. And Blue Ridge is a shell, Naomi said. I traced it through 3 layers of LLCs before I hit a wall. But the registered agent on the second layer has a shared address with a property management firm whose principal is a man named Harrison Weld. A pause. Weld, Okonkwo repeated, and she could hear him typing. The county commissioner, former, Naomi said. He left the commission in 2022, 14 months before the first property in this pattern was sold, giving him just enough distance to be deniable. Another pause, longer this time. I'll need the full file, Okonkwo said. I've already sent it, Naomi said. Encrypted. Check your other inbox. She heard him let out a slow breath. Naomi, he said, how long have you been working on this? 61 days, she said. And your mother is? She's fine, Naomi said. She'll be better when this is over. She hung up. Tamara was watching her from the driver's seat with an expression that was 1 part concern and 2 parts awe. You want to stop and eat something? Tamara asked. After, Naomi said. What came next did not move at the pace of television, where federal agencies materialize with warrants and handcuffs within the space of a commercial break. It moved at the pace of law, which is slower and less dramatic and more permanent. Okonkwo spent 6 days reviewing the file. Then he spent another 11 days with his team, cross-referencing Naomi's work with public records, transaction filings, and 2 confidential informants who had been, until that week, marginally relevant to a separate wire fraud investigation. One of those informants knew Harrison Weld. One of them had attended 3 meetings at which Weld had described, with some precision, the mechanics of the referral to foreclosure pipeline he had spent the better part of 4 years constructing. The informant had not said anything before because no one had asked the right questions. Naomi's file asked the right questions. On the 22nd day after Naomi landed in Atlanta, a federal grand jury in the Northern District of Georgia issued subpoenas, not to Harrison Weld, not yet, but to Meridian Financial Partners, to Blue Ridge Holdings LLC and its 3 subsidiary entities, and to the county clerk's office, requesting all records related to tax auction sales in Colbert County, dating back to 2019. Terrence Aldecoa, the financial advisor with the good hair and the Rolex, received his subpoena on a Thursday. He hired a lawyer by Friday afternoon. By Monday, the lawyer had called the prosecutor's office to discuss the possibility of a cooperation agreement. Chad Bellwether, the junior associate who had laughed on the phone with Naomi in November, received his subpoena the same day. He did not hire a lawyer by Friday. He called his mother. Harold Pruitt, the deputy who had served the eviction notice, was not initially a target of the investigation. He was a small instrument in a large mechanism. But when federal investigators reviewed the records of the eviction proceedings in Colbert County and noticed that Pruitt had served 22 eviction notices in the past 3 years, a number significantly higher than any other deputy in the county, and that all 22 properties had subsequently been purchased by Blue Ridge or its affiliates, Pruitt was invited to a voluntary interview. He came with a lawyer. He said very little. The lawyer said even less. 2 weeks after the subpoenas were issued, the story broke in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A staff reporter named Wren Caldwell had been watching the grand jury filings and had connected enough of the threads to put together a draft that her editor held for 48 hours while their legal team reviewed it, then published on a Wednesday morning under the headline, Federal Investigators Probe, Alleged Foreclosure Scheme Targeting Ganono in Colbert County. The story named Meridian Financial Partners. It named Blue Ridge Holdings. It named Harrison Weld. It mentioned, in the 4th paragraph, that the investigation had been initiated in part due to a complaint filed by a family member of one of the affected homeowners, a JAG attorney in the United States Army, who had returned from overseas deployment to find her mother displaced from a 31-year family home. The story did not name Naomi. Naomi had not wanted to be named. By the time the article ran, Naomi was sitting in Tamara's kitchen in Savannah, eating the first proper meal she'd had in 2 months. Tamara's sweet potato soup, with cornbread and a glass of water because she was still, technically, on a disciplined deployment schedule in her own head. Eunice was across the table, reading the article on Tamara's tablet, her glasses perched on the end of her nose, her expression unreadable. They spelled my name wrong in the property records, Eunice said finally, pointing at the screen. What? Tamara leaned over to look. They have me listed as Eunice Vickers Arthur. That's not my name. My name is Eunice Marie Vickers. She looked at Naomi. Is that going to matter? It might, Naomi said. Eunice nodded, satisfied, and went back to reading. The hearing was held 6 weeks later in federal district court. It was not the criminal trial that would come later and would be longer and would involve 17 counts spread across 4 defendants, including Harrison Weld, Terrence Aldecoa, and 2 principals of Blue Ridge Holdings, whose names had not appeared in any public document until the indictment unsealed them. The hearing was a civil proceeding. A motion for emergency injunctive relief on behalf of 14 homeowners, whose properties had been transferred in the course of the scheme. Naomi had stepped back from the civil case out of professional necessity. A JAG officer in active service is limited in the civilian legal work she can directly conduct, but she had helped structure the argument and had connected the 14 families with a civil rights firm in Atlanta called Wellspring Law, whose senior partner, a woman named Deborah Achebe Morris, had been waiting for a case exactly like this one for about 15 years. Achebe Morris was 61, small, with close-cropped silver hair and the unhurried manner of someone who has already won enough fights to know that patience is the sharpest weapon in any courtroom. She presented the motion with 27 exhibits and a timeline that the judge, an appointee with a reputation for deliberate thinking and an intolerance for procedural chicanery, followed without interrupting. At the end of the presentation, the judge looked at the attorney representing Blue Ridge Holdings and Meridian Financial Partners, a man from a downtown Atlanta firm who wore a suit that cost more than most of the affected homeowners' monthly incomes, and asked, without inflection, whether he had anything substantive to add to what had been presented. The attorney said he had several objections to the framing. The judge said he was not interested in the framing. He was interested in the facts. The attorney said the facts were disputed. The judge looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly too long to be comfortable. Motion granted, the judge said. The injunction froze all property transfers related to the identified Blue Ridge portfolio pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. 14 families, including Eunice Vickers, were issued temporary orders allowing them to return to their homes pending resolution. Eunice got the call on a Thursday afternoon. Tamara called Naomi before she even called their mother. "She can go back," Tamara said, and her voice broke on the last word. Naomi was quiet for a moment, not because she was surprised. She had believed this was coming. But there is a difference between believing something is coming and feeling it arrive. And in that moment, in the space between Tamara's words and her own response, she allowed herself to feel it. "I know," Naomi said. "When are you flying back?" Tamara asked. "I have a proceeding in 10 days, Naomi said. "I'll be there before that." She was there in 5. They drove to Sycamore Bluff Road on a Saturday afternoon, all 3 of them, Naomi, Tamara, and Eunice, who had dressed again in her church clothes, because that was how she had left, and that was how she intended to return. The sold notice had been removed from the door pending the injunction. The house stood as it had always stood, a little drafty in winter, the kitchen tile still exactly as Arthur had laid it, the magnolia tree in the front yard bare in March, but unmistakably alive, already preparing, in the patient botanical way of magnolias, to bloom. Eunice stood on the porch for a long time before she opened the door. Neither of her daughters spoke. They understood, without needing to say it, that this moment was hers. When Eunice finally put the key in the lock and turned it, she stood for one more breath in the open doorway, looking at the entry hall, the coat rack where Arthur's old jacket still hung, the rug they had bought at an estate sale in 1998, and which had somehow survived 30 years of children and dogs and tracked in Georgia mud. "Okay," she said softly. No one in particular, or maybe to Arthur. Then she walked inside. What followed, in the months after, moved with the same deliberate momentum as the investigation itself. Terrence Aldecoa accepted a plea agreement. He agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence on 2 counts of fraud. His cooperation confirmed what the documents had only implied, that Meridian Financial Partners had been systematically identifying elderly homeowners through church and community referral networks, targeting those with substantial home equity and limited financial literacy, and structuring equity lines designed to trigger default within 18 to 36 months. The defaulted properties were then moved through a coordinated auction mechanism to Blue Ridge Holdings, which stripped them and either resold or redeveloped them at significant profit. Aldecoa had personally overseen this process for 11 clients. The total value of the properties involved was approximately $4.2 million. Harrison Weld, the former county commissioner, was indicted on 9 counts of racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and violation of the Fair Housing Act. His attorney argued at arraignment that his client was a community developer who had been unfairly implicated by a federal overreach. The judge set bail at $750,000. Weld paid it. His attorney began negotiating what his bail premium had already telegraphed. He understood to be a losing hand. Blue Ridge Holdings LLC was dissolved by court order. Its assets, 14 properties in various stages of transfer or redevelopment, were placed in receivership pending the outcome of the civil suit. The civil suit, filed on behalf of all 14 affected families by Wellspring Law, sought compensatory damages, punitive damages, and equitable relief. It named Meridian Financial Partners, Blue Ridge Holdings, Harrison Weld, and 6 individual parties. It sought a total of $18 million. Deborah Achebe Morris did not try to settle. The case went to trial in November. It lasted 19 days. Naomi was not called as a witness. She was military counsel, not a party to the civil proceeding, but she was in the courtroom every day that her leave schedule permitted, sitting in the gallery in civilian clothes, watching. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They returned on a Friday afternoon. Eunice Vickers was in the courtroom. She was sitting in the first row of the gallery, between Tamara and the wife of one of the other 14 families, a woman named June Hollister, whose husband had spent 60 years paying off a house in the same county, before Meridian's advisor had convinced him to tap his equity for a renovation loan and then watch the rate climb until the payments became impossible. June Hollister was 74. She had brought her rosary. She was holding it in her right hand and Eunice's hand in her left when the verdict was read. The jury found for the plaintiffs on all counts. Compensatory damages, $6.4 million. Punitive damages, $9.1 million. Totals. Allocated proportionally among the 14 families. The woman sitting to Eunice's left, June Hollister, made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughter and was somehow both. And Eunice put her arm around her, and the courtroom, which had been holding its collective breath, exhaled all at once. Outside the courthouse, Achebe Morris addressed the press with the same unhurried composure she brought to everything. She thanked her team. She thanked the federal investigators. She thanked the 14 families for their courage and their patience. She did not mention Naomi by name, because Naomi had asked her not to. Naomi was standing at the edge of the crowd, in a coat and sunglasses, watching. When the press conference ended and Achebe Morris walked toward her, the older woman looked at her for a long moment. "You know," Achebe Morris said, "most people who do what you did would want credit for it." "I don't need credit," Naomi said. "What do you need?" Naomi considered the question with the same precision she brought to legal arguments. "My mother's house," she said. "That's it. That was always it." Achebe Morris studied her. "You'd have made a hell of a civil rights attorney," she said. "I'm a hell of a JAG attorney," Naomi said. Achebe Morris smiled. "Yes," she said, "you are." Harrison Weld pled guilty 11 months later, 2 weeks before his criminal trial was scheduled to begin, when 2 of his co-defendants flipped on him, and the weight of the evidence became, in his attorney's measured professional language, insurmountable. He was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. He would be eligible for parole after serving 10. He was 62 years old. He would be in his mid-70s at the earliest possible release. Terence Aldecoa received 4 years and 3 months. He surrendered his licenses. He would never work in financial services again. The Colbert County Sheriff's Office commissioned an internal review of its eviction practices. Harold Pruitt was not immediately terminated, but he was reassigned to a desk role pending the outcome of the review. 3 months later, he retired quietly, which was the most graceful exit available to him, and which he took without being asked a second time. Meridian Financial Partners lost its operating licenses in the state of Georgia. The firm dissolved by the following spring. The glass building in downtown Augusta with the leather-scented lobby was leased to a dental practice. Blue Ridge Holdings, already dissolved, left behind nothing but a paper trail and 14 restored deeds. The following April, on a Saturday that arrived with the kind of soft southern warmth that feels like an apology from February, a small ceremony was held in the front yard of 441 Sycamore Bluff Road. The magnolia tree was beginning to bloom, white flowers, large as saucers, the first of the season. Naomi had flown in from Stuttgart on a 72-hour pass. Tamara had driven up from Savannah with her husband and all 3 kids. June Hollister was there, and 3 other families from the group of 14, and Deborah Achibe Morris, and Delray Okonkwo, who stood in the back with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking like a man who did not come to ceremonies often, but had made an exception for this one. There was no agenda. There was food. Eunice's sweet potato pie, which several people made sounds about that bordered on the spiritual, and there were children running on the lawn, and there was the late afternoon light, turning the magnolia blossoms gold at the edges, and there was Eunice Vickers, seated in her chair, on her porch in her church clothes, watching all of it with the expression of someone who has been told a hard truth and found, on the other side of it, something worth keeping. Naomi sat beside her. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. At some point, Eunice said, "Your father would have liked this." "Yeah," Naomi said. "He would have lost his mind over the new car." Eunice laughed, a real laugh, sudden and warm. "Don't you start." The car was a concession Naomi had made to her mother's dignity and her own guilt. A new vehicle, nothing extravagant, a dark green sedan with good seatbelts and a backup camera, which Eunice had accepted with the particular grace of someone who knows how to receive a gift without making it about the gift. "I'm going to miss you when you go back," Eunice said after a while. "I'll call," Naomi said. "You always say that. I always do it." "Not enough." "No," Naomi agreed. "Not enough." Eunice was quiet for a moment, watching one of Tamara's kids chase a dog across the lawn. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that I am very proud of what you did. I know you didn't want anyone to make a fuss about it." "I didn't do anything special," Naomi said. "I did my job." "You came home," Eunice said. "That's not your job. That was you." Naomi said nothing. The magnolia moved in a light wind, and the petals held their shape. There are people in this world who will look at someone and see only what they're willing to see. An old woman with a box of photographs. A house in a neighborhood they've already written off. A target so ordinary, so unconnected, that they don't bother to ask who she might belong to, or what the people who love her might be willing to do. That is the miscalculation that undoes them every time. Not the law, not the system, not the investigation that eventually comes. Though all of those matter, and all of those are real. It's the simpler thing underneath, the assumption that ordinary people have no one in their corner. Eunice Vickers had someone in her corner. She had 2 daughters who loved her, one with a van full of kids and a heart full of warmth, and one with a law degree and a security clearance, and 61 days of methodical, patient, irrefutable work that dismantled a criminal enterprise from the ground up. Harrison Weld ran a scheme for 4 years. He thought he was untouchable because the people he targeted had no power. He was right about the targeting and wrong about the power. He simply hadn't looked closely enough at the names on the mail. If this story of a mother's house, a daughter's determination, and a system forced to answer for itself meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Naomi's place? And if justice like this matters to you, subscribe to Voices of Truth. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them deserves to be told.